This is Indiana in the Morning, presented by First Commonwealth Bank here on WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160. Time now for another interview presented by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. We've been hearing this morning in our news cycle about the recent settlement from Purdue Pharma, and which Pennsylvania will receive a good chunk of that settlement. But other drug companies and suppliers are on trial over the opioid epidemic that has claimed 500,000 lives in the last 20 years. Joining us on the phone this morning is Dr. Robert Powers to talk about this issue. Dr. Powers, it is good that you were able to join us this morning here on Indiana in the Morning, sir.
Happy to do so.
All right. So, Dr. Powers, let's talk about this right now. This is getting to be historic because we're about to see the first opioid trial in U.S. history that will target the entire supply chain. Maybe you can fill in our listeners a little bit about that.
Well, it's interesting in that the questions about the drug and its effectiveness as a analgesic really isn't the source of question. The issues come up as to the extent to which there was misrepresentation or misinformation, improper direction or advice regarding use supplied up and down the whole process. So it's very interesting from that respect. So we're really looking, the question is, was there some degree of malfeasance on the part of the companies and the supply chain?
We have been hearing, as we mentioned, about the Purdue Pharma settlement that has come out, which went up from, I believe, about $3 billion to $4.5 billion. And as we mentioned, Pennsylvania is going to see a good chunk of that. Is that going to have any play into this whenever the topic comes up? As you mentioned, this is going to focus on much more of the malfeasance and misrepresentation side than what the drugs can do.
If indeed there was such, and I think that's the question. Clearly, it's a serious enough question that the Attorney General is pursuing the case. So obviously, there's something going on there to some extent. Now, how far that's going to go, I obviously can't know. But therein lies the question. And again, the efficacy of the drug is not the source of the issue.
Right. But we've been hearing all sorts of cases about this. And again, this is going to be the first that's going to really talk about the malfeasance. But let's talk about, I guess, kind of the some of the effects, the mechanistic effects of drugs and alcohol on our society. I mean, we've been brought up to, we've been raised to don't do drugs, don't do the Just Say No campaign. That's what I had in the 1980s when I was growing up. Uh-huh. But it's kind of difficult now to kind of see which way to go, because on the one hand, you have the drugs that you know that are illegal, and then you have, on the other hand, people that are abusing drugs that have been cleared for treatment options, but people are abusing these just as they would, say, marijuana or crack cocaine.
Yeah, and is an interesting one because it too was legitimately used for medical purposes for a long time, quite a while ago. But the opiates represent a real conundrum because they have been extensively abused for centuries, but they also represent a very valuable and useful branch of medicinals. Just absolutely superb for pain control, and when properly used with and properly monitored by medical personnel, pretty reliable and safe. So, the issues come with people kind of becoming, I would say, misallocating or misappropriating, misusing legitimate prescription medications, and the background of the same types of drugs, the opiates, being available as black market drugs of abuse as well. So it's a complex picture.
It is complex, and I think it would get even more complex at the level of a toxicologist, I would imagine, because of the fact that they are seeing this, and we're seeing more and more of this firsthand, and we're seeing kind of this opioid. We've seen this opioid epidemic come through, and naturally the COVID-19 pandemic took a lot of attention over the last year, but now we're seeing the opioid epidemic kind of peek its way back through.
Yeah, interesting that you say that. From the toxicologist perspective, we're normally dealing with trying to provide information to help the forensic pathologist determine cause and manner of death. We don't make such a determination ourselves. And that process has always gone on. So the question in many of our death cases becomes, what was the source of the opiate in question? Was it illicit? Was it consistent with a prescription medication regimen? Were there underlying medical factors that played into causing the death, and there was no issue with the drug per se? So these questions are very tricky, and our respect and acknowledgement goes to the forensic pathologists who have to kind of take all the pieces together in a particular case and sort it out. And they're the ones that are really on the front line of dealing with the opiate epidemic, so to speak.
How tough is it for something like an opiate to be traced? Going back from the person who has died from the overdose, trying to find how they got it?
Quite often, it can be fairly straightforward, and that moves into the realm of law enforcement and crime investigation. And in that case, it can often be fairly straightforward, and there are a number of prosecutions going forward where individuals who have supplied drugs to people who subsequently died are prosecuted for having been the source of those drugs. When you ask if the question is more, can you determine what the source of morphine in an individual was, for example, can we tell if that's a prescription drug or was it, say, from heroin? Depending on the case and what the particular toxicologic findings are, in many cases we can. With something like a semi-synthetic opiate like oxycodone or oxymorphone or hydrocodone, those are not, or I should say the black market availability is a function of the localized market, and the drug or law enforcement personnel are generally pretty much aware of what's available in the local market.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the new analogs coming in, the fentanyl analogs, tracing it back to the original source, that becomes more of a challenge, but it can be done in certain cases, and that's normally done by the larger investigatory agencies, usually under the auspices of DEA and their big laboratories, where they can look for a specific pattern of impurities or other compounds that may be present.
We're talking with an associate professor of forensic science at the University of New Haven, Dr. Robert Powers, about drug companies and suppliers being on trial over the opioid epidemic that has claimed many lives over the last 20 years or so. And I just wanted to maybe put this question to you. Say if this does happen and the companies are found responsible for negligence, what changes do you foresee may be happening in the distribution of opioids? Is it going to be more difficult for, say, someone to get a hold of it for illicit use?
I would expect so. I think the illicit paths have been pretty much, I would say, brought up to speed, so to speak. It's very difficult for the problems that we used to have with people doctor shopping and getting multiple opiate prescriptions. That's much more difficult to do nowadays with the various computerized data systems that exist. So I think that kind of thing has already been addressed. As far as diversion to illicit markets, that's always going to be a localized. That's not going to be a company-based operation.
Right.
That's going to be a kind of an individual, and that will clearly be illegal. And I would assume, to the extent that such activities are discovered, they'll be prosecuted. Maybe,
I guess, then, if we see fines associated with this, we could see like what happened with the Purdue Pharma settlement, and we heard from our Attorney General Josh Shapiro, and he said that the money that Pennsylvania will receive will go towards efforts in fighting that. So maybe that might happen as well with the larger companies.
Yes, again, and it's going to depend the extent that there was institutional negligence or some legal liability that they have for some behavior on a part of the company, as opposed to an inappropriate action on the basis of an individual, as I understand it.
Right. Okay. Dr. Powers, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're just about out of time, but this conversation definitely has been enlightening, to say the least. Again, thanks a lot for being a part of the show.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you again. Dr. Robert Powers, an associate professor of forensic science at the University of New Haven, joining us this morning on Indiana in the Morning, presented by First Commonwealth Bank, here on the Voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160 and AM 1160.